Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Todd Klindt's SharePoint podcast number 234, recorded live from a tree stump outside of Punxsutawney on February 2nd, 2015. I am your host, Todd Klindt, and I'm just doing this podcast so that I won't get fined. And the folks that would find me, though they would never do that because they're far too generous and all that, are the folks at Rackspace. You can go to sharepoint.rackspace.com and see what's up there for SharePoint folks at Rackspace. Little birdie has told me in the next week or two we might have some changes, might be getting a bit of a facelift, so you're going to want to go now. Check out sharepoint.rackspace.com now so that you can fully appreciate the new version and all of its splendor. That's sharepoint.rackspace.com. For our production notes, everything went pretty well last week, except I forgot to blog the netcast on Thursday, but got the MP3 out pretty quickly. Got that out Tuesday-ish or so, maybe Wednesday, but got the MP3 out, got the RSS feed updated pretty quickly. I kind of need to revamp that a little bit. There's some things I've been wanting to do, but that's probably the quickest way to get the brand new podcast every week is to subscribe to the MP3 feed, and I got links to that everywhere, like on every page of my blog and the netcast page and all over the place. But that's the first one that I produce because it's the easiest. I don't have to do any lower thirds or anything like that. So I drop the file into Camtasia, trim out the stuff that's the beginning at the end, normalize the audio, spit it out. I got a PowerShell script that uploads it to my website and all that. So that's probably the quickest way to get it if you're one of the audio folks. And then video-wise, probably the fastest way to get it then is to subscribe to my YouTube channel, toddklindt.com or not Todd Klindt, ignore that, youtube.com/Todd Klindt Netcast. And I will probably be giving some stuff away. I've got some, I got a pile of tablets as tall as my middle kid here. Going to have to get rid of some of those. Also got a Fitbit that I'm going to be getting rid of. I got a Fitbit Flex, I think, when I bought my phone. I'll be giving that to a lucky viewer somewhere. And probably the way I'm going to do that is on YouTube. So I'm thinking, hear me out, this is not official, so don't go running over to your browsers just yet. But I think probably next week, maybe, I will say that, for podcast 235, if you want to be involved in whatever the drawing is for that week, you need to, number one, be a subscriber to my YouTube channel when I pick the winner, and number two, you need to leave a comment for that podcast. So then what I'll do is whatever I put for the deadline, I'll go into that specific podcast, I'll look through the comments, randomly pick one, something like that. So, but I think I'm going to try to do that. Get some more YouTube subscribers. I'm not opposed to paying people to subscribe to my YouTube channel, giving them things. I know the deal. I'm not opposed to that whatsoever, but that's coming up. So again, I think production went pretty well. One other thing that I did want to mention, and it's kind of a production-y thing, kind of not, but I wanted to get it in the beginning before everybody stops listening or falls asleep or whatever. And that is the Podcast Awards. So you can go to www.podcastawards.com and you can nominate your favorite podcast. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, that tells me that you've probably got a whole bunch of other podcasts that you listen to, because there's about 1,012,000 that are better than this one. So if you're scraping the bottom of the barrel and listening to this, you're probably listening to some others. But you can go to podcastawards.com and nominate your favorite podcast, something they've been doing for like 10 years now. But if you like this podcast, and if you think it's, all that, you can, I would like to ask you to nominate it for the technical podcast track. So you got different categories that you can nominate them for, best cooking podcast and all that kind of stuff. There's adult podcasts, adult only. I would prefer to not be nominated for that one. I understand the appeal that I have. I get that. It's been that way my whole life, but I would prefer that you love me for my brains and not for my rugged good looks. So I would like the technical podcast, and you can just put in Todd Klindt's SharePoint podcast, and then for the URL, put toddklindt.com/netcast. There is not a snowball's chance in hell that I will get anywhere, but I will consider to win if I just make it through one nomination thing. They announced the top 10 or something. Would just love to do that. That would just be fun. So if you think about that, go out to podcastawards.com. You have to do that by February 6th, I believe, is when they close that. Oh yes. So, and I forgot, and I should really watch myself before I say things like this. But I said when I first announced this a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned this, and I think I said that if I make it to the nomination thing that's going to be in Vegas, because I know that I can't win, but if I make it to the nomination thing in Vegas, if I go to Vegas, I'll take Lori with me, is apparently what I said. But when I say that out loud, that sounds really weird. Should have talked to my wife about that. Anywho, just kind of want to see how well that would go. But if you don't mind doing that, and while you're out there, nominate all your other favorite podcasts as well. They do that award during the New Media Expo. I went there the last couple of years when it was in January. Learned a lot of great stuff, and it would be just a fun thing. So go out there and do that. Okay, so let's do some topics. Boy, this last week. Just the last couple of days has been crazy full of stuff, and we'll try to get through all of it. I don't know if I'm going to have time because I've got a lot of things to talk about. But the big news that everybody's talking about, and we'll talk about why I'm not sure why that's such big news, is an article that Julia White published today to the Office blog about the evolution of SharePoint. And while the evolution of SharePoint itself is not very exciting, what this blog post does is it confirms once again that there will be another on-prem version of SharePoint. Now, the thing about that is Microsoft has said numerous times publicly that there would be another version of SharePoint Server on-prem. Microsoft has never said anything to make people think there would not be another version of on-prem SharePoint. But yet everybody, well, not everybody, but a great number of people have speculated that the on-prem version of the product is done, that it's dead, that Microsoft is going to make everybody go to Office 365. Nobody at Microsoft has ever said that. And again, as recently as like a year ago, they said there will be at least one more on-prem version of SharePoint. And then in another interview, some guy said they will continue making, some guy from Microsoft, and I can't remember who it is, said they will continue making on-prem versions of SharePoint as long as there is demand. So I can't see any evidence that Microsoft is trying to kill on-prem SharePoint, but yet the feeling in the community and the feeling, in journalists and all that is that it's dead. 2013 was the last one we're going to get. So today, Julia White posted this thing that said that it is not dead. And it was kind of in a roundabout way because she talked about all the different things from the evolution of SharePoint and where it started, where it came from, how it started as a humble collaboration platform and where it's gone. And so the too long didn't read version is the next version of SharePoint Server on-prem will be called SharePoint 2016, and it will be out sometime at the end of this year. So it'll be out, the fall or something like that. So that's the short version. The long version is she gave a really good explanation of where the product came from, the humble collaboration beginnings that we all played with, for those of us who played with SharePoint 2001 and SharePoint 2003, and then, where they're at now and where they're going. And something that I think was a big topic inside of that blog post, and something that I think is important is the idea of hybrid. I think the big thing that we're going to see in SharePoint 2016, and rightfully so, is that hybrid is going to be the focus of the on-prem product, and I think that's smart. So there's a lot of, I don't know, we all kind of read the tea leaves a little differently, and when this whole cloud push started, it felt to a lot of us like Microsoft was saying, put everything in the cloud, put everything in the cloud, put everything in the cloud. But that doesn't work for any number of reasons. That doesn't work for a bunch of different industries. That doesn't work. I mean, there's just that plan just is going to fail from the beginning. And I think that hampered Office 365 and SharePoint Online adoption. And then I feel like a year and a half ago, the message morphed into hybrid. And we saw some stuff at the SharePoint conference last year about it. We saw some stuff at TechEd. I did talk about using OneDrive for Business as a hybrid thing. And I feel now that that's been more of Microsoft's focus when it comes to SharePoint on-prem and SharePoint Online is this idea of hybrid. And I think that is genius for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it's just the way that it has to go. If they want to bring anybody into SharePoint Online, letting them dip their toe in it and do a hybrid is the way to go. Making everybody jump completely from on-prem to online There's no way that's going to work. But if you can start pulling little pieces of it out of on-prem and online, the pieces that make sense, that makes sense, and that gives people the ability to move at their own pace. Instead of moving their entire farm into SharePoint Online, they can move the My Sites, they can move just the social, but bit by bit. It's that whole, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Hybrid, one of the many reasons that hybrid is a great idea is because it gives you the ability to break that migration into consumable chunks. So I think just from an adoption standpoint alone, that's brilliant, and I think that will greatly help their. I don't think they did it for diabolical reasons, but I think that's the way they're going to get people into SharePoint Online. Just a little bit of it at a time. The SharePoint Online product continues to get better, so once people get in there and play with it a little bit, I think they're going to like it. The other thing is there are just certain workloads that don't make sense in the cloud, and so the ability to easily do hybrid lets those people take advantage of the stuff that SharePoint Online does do well, but still keep their full trust code and those kind of things. So I think hybrids was a big deal in 2014. It's going to be a huge deal in 2015. And from this blog post from Julia White, I can tell that Microsoft knows that, and it looks like that's what a lot of the on-prem stuff is going to be. But one of the things that she does in this blog post is she breaks it down into a bunch of different things. She talks about what's new, the things that they're working on and innovating in search and the business portals. One of the things that she talks about is files, and there's a phrase in here that says OneDrive ultimately removes the need for personal file servers and local hard drives. I don't know about all of that. I think there's a lot of files that don't make sense in SharePoint. But I like where they're going. I like that that's where their mind is, that they want to make OneDrive that much better. And I didn't talk about it much last week, but there were new OneDrive clients released for iOS and Mac, and OneDrive is getting better. OneDrive is something that I never really used much before. The product's getting better. I think the OneDrive team would be very honest that there are a lot of room for improvement, but they seem dedicated to doing the right thing. So, I use OneDrive a lot. Dropbox is my cloud drive tool of choice. OneDrive's starting to creep in, though. I even published a blog post here a few months ago about why I don't use OneDrive, and I think that was. And I didn't do that to be snarky or anything, because that's not the kind of blogger I am. But what it really did was it gave me a great point-in-time reference to where that product was. So now I can look back, and they've even fixed some of those things since then. So I think OneDrive is going to be a big thing, and OneDrive for Business being integrated into SharePoint is pretty interesting. So, but there's just all kinds of stuff. As an IT pro, the last couple of years have been scary for me because I just don't know where SharePoint's going, and I don't know what my role will be. And I feel like this blog post makes me a little less scared. It lets me know that I do have a job for the next couple of years, and maybe a couple of years after that. My kids might get to go to college. I might not have to flip burgers. Nothing wrong with flipping burgers. There are some days I would like the responsibility of only making sure the burgers get flipped. But again, for IT pros and for admins, it's been scary the last year or so, and I feel like this blog post from Julia White makes it a little less scary. So go out to blogs.office.com and check that out. Now, one of the things, well, there's a couple of great links in there that I wanted to talk about. One of them is she mentions the Ignite conference, and you guys have probably heard me talk about that once or twice. Ignite is the big tech conference from Microsoft now. They've collapsed TechEd and SharePoint Conference and MEC and MMS and Link Conference and the Notepad Conference. All of them will be under one big roof in May, and the Ignite conference will be May 4th through the 8th in Chicago, Illinois, and it will be gigantic. It will be the event of the season. Everybody who's anybody will be at Ignite, and one of the things that happened last week was they released a bunch of the first round of sessions that they've approved, and there's a bunch of SharePoint sessions in there. Not a lot, not enough, but it's just the first round, so we can kind of see from those sessions that they're choosing where things are going. And a couple of the sessions are a first look at SharePoint vNext, which we now know is SharePoint 2016, a whole bunch of sessions on hybrid and integrating this and integrating that. So if you haven't already signed up for it, go to ignite.microsoft.com, get signed up for that, and you can start looking through, seeing what the sessions are. There's going to be some great content out there. They also released the first round of featured speakers. There are a bunch of SharePoint speakers on there. Sadly, I haven't made the cut yet, but I'm talking to my congressman, and I think you should all write your congressman as well and see about getting that. When they did release a thing to previous speakers and all that a couple of weeks ago, and I filled the stuff out, and they said they would let us know the end of February. Oh my goodness, I'll not last that long. It'll be scary. But there is some great speakers out there, guys like Bill Baer and Christian Buckley and Dan Holm and Andrew Connell. I mean, just some real big names in the SharePoint community. So again, if you haven't signed up for that yet, ignite.microsoft.com. Get out there, make that happen. You will not regret it. And if you don't sign up for it, when you start seeing the tweets and all that kind of stuff, you'll regret it. You'll wish you'd done it. So that was one of the things that Julia linked in her blog post was Ignite. And another thing that she linked was a paper that I started reading this morning from Bob German. It's called New Guidance from Microsoft for Packaging and Deploying SharePoint Solutions. And this was not a weird one, but it's kind of, so Bob works for Microsoft, obviously, or he would not probably be able to speak for Microsoft in such a capacity. But he's talking about some training courses that are on the Microsoft Virtual Academy, the MVA, and how Microsoft's guidance on customizing and developing for SharePoint is changing. And there's some good stuff and some bad stuff in there. So first off, the course from MVA is free. You can just click it and watch it. It's a video. I have not watched it all yet because it's, I got the day job thing. Just saw it this morning. Been busy. But some good stuff in there. Now, as you all know, this is not a developer podcast. I am not a developer, nor can I play one on TV. But as I read through this very long, thorough blog post from Bob, there's a bunch of really great stuff in here for admins for a whole bunch of reasons. So even if you're not a developer, it's a great read. Number one, if nothing else, it gives you some great ammunition when your devs try to do something dumb. You can point them back to this and say, this is not where things are going. One of the things that I liked about this is that Bob admits that Microsoft had bad guidance in the past. There's some mea culpa in here, and I like that because in the past it's felt like we've gotten guidance from Microsoft and then we've gone that route and then they've changed their mind and said, oh wait, well, I don't know why you did that. We've always said this. That's not the case. So this has been a really great read. Again, I'm not going to go through all of it, but one of the big changes that comes in this that they talk about is Microsoft asking you to get away from deploying lists and things like that with features and list templates and site templates and things like that. And they're trying to talk people into, instead of doing this, doing some stuff with CSOM, the client-side object model, or REST, and they've got links to code and things like that, but there's a lot of things that we've taken for granted that they're changing. So if you've been doing SharePoint for a while, this is a good read for you. And they talk about some, they're trying to fix some problems that were problems that we all knew about. Things like if you've got a feature that creates a list and that feature gets shut down, do the lists that were created with that go away? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Not consistent behavior. And then what happens to that content database if you drop it into another farm, or if you have to do some disaster recovery and you can't find that solution that had that feature? So these are some very real problems that every one of us have had. We've all faced west or wherever Seattle is from you, and swore and shook our fists menacingly at Microsoft for doing this. So they're in a constant state of improvement. So they're trying to figure this stuff out. So There's a bunch of great links in here. One of them that I thought was particularly helpful is for us admins. There's a Codeplex project that lets you do client-side calls from PowerShell. Now, this wasn't the best example that I've seen of this. Chris O'Brien has a blog post about that, and it's the one that I use when I do my talks about using PowerShell against SharePoint Online. It's a great, Chris Bryan's got a much better blog post on that, and I'll probably put that in the notes. Lori, make a note, and I'll put that in the notes. I've talked about that in previous podcasts, but we've got this idea of the client-side object model that's kind of new in SharePoint 2013. SharePoint 2010 had it, but it wasn't very usable. But with 2013, the idea that we can run this code not on a server, but in the browser on the client side to do some of these things. And that's where Microsoft's really been pushing things, because they want their Office 365 servers to be solid, and they don't want them to perform badly. And so they want to run the code in your browser because they don't care if your browser is unstable or runs badly. But the client-side object model is mostly a tool that developers can use to write apps and things like that. But what Chris O'Brien shows in his blog post and what I do for customers is you can make those same client-side object calls from PowerShell. You can make those calls. So things that you can do in the client-side object model, for instance, in the for SharePoint Online, with the SharePoint Online PowerShell commandlets, all 30 of them, you can't enumerate webs, for instance, but you can at the client-side object model. So you can write a PowerShell one-liner or commandlet, use the client-side object model to list all your webs in SharePoint Online, things like that. The other great thing about doing that is those things that work with SharePoint Online also work with SharePoint on-prem. So you're not learning that for nothing. And this client-side object model functionality is getting bigger all the time. Every couple of months, there's just new things you can do with CSOM, and a bunch of that functionality gets included into cumulative updates for SharePoint 2013 on-prem. So for instance, before April 2014, it was not possible without server-side code to create a site collection with CSOM. And so for our case, PowerShell. The April 2014 CU did a bunch of stuff, added the functionality for that. So now potentially you can have users, not admins, creating site collections, things like that. So there's just a really great a bunch of stuff in there, and for us admins, it's a great way for us to learn how to do stuff from our desks without using PowerShell remoting or anything like that. But it also gives our clients the ability, or customers, to do that kind of stuff. So there's a Codeplex project there, but there's also some other ones. One of the things that they covered here that I was not a fan of was branding guidance. Branding is one of those things that the app model has never done very well. And my friends that do branding are Randy Driscoll, Kathy Dew, John Ross. Always hearing those guys lament about how the app model doesn't do branding very well. There's some kludges you can do, some hacks that you can do, but it doesn't do it very well. And so there's a section of Bob's paper here called Branding Guidance that kind of talks about what the options are. I don't think any real branding people are going to be happy with any of these things. For instance, so at the top of his list, he's got 5 pieces of advice. And he starts it out by saying the advice is to take as light of a touch as possible, which I agree with. You should do as little damage to anything in life as possible, branding included. But his very first piece of advice was, don't brand. Really. So as an admin, as somebody who sets up SharePoint for a living all the time, one of the very first questions out of any customer's mouth is, how can I make this not look like SharePoint? Everybody wants that. So their first piece of advice is, let it look like SharePoint. And they back that up with, you don't brand Outlook or Word. Why do you need branding on collaboration sites? Goodness, I don't even know where to begin. I can only imagine that was a joke when they put that in. But then they talk about things like using Office 365 themes and what the pluses and minuses are, SharePoint themes, doing things like CSS. And CSS is interesting because it lets you change color, it lets you change the formatting of things that are already there, and to a smaller degree move things around, but it doesn't let you be as flexible, say, master pages do. And one of the things that they mention is that April 2014 cumulative update for SharePoint 2013 has some of the beginnings of letting you alter CSS with CSOM, or the client-side API, and good stuff there. And then they talk about, what the pluses and minuses of that are, and master pages and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that they say at the bottom, and I think this is kind of a good way to think about this, as they say, Microsoft is clear that custom master pages are still supported. They called them a tax, however. The responsibility for keeping the master page in sync with SharePoint belongs to the customer, not to Microsoft. And I think that's, calling it a tax is kind of hardcore, but I like this idea that if you change things, master pages, whatever, you need to understand that there's a price in, sweat equity, that you don't change it once and sit back and leave it. You change it, and it's it's got a reoccurring cost. So that's something to keep in mind. I think there should be better branding in SharePoint, but I like this idea that they're going to make you think it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing support thing. So I like that. But definitely, Bob's article, it's long and it's heavy in developer stuff, but for admins, it's got some invaluable stuff, and it's kind of like looking into the future. I mean, this is not going to be the last time you hear about this. So as an admin, it's good to figure out where things are going. Make sure you guide your ship in the right direction. So here's a couple of just tech crazy fun stuff. One of the things that I saw today when I was looking through all my RSS feeds and all that was those crazy folks that make the Raspberry Pi have done it again. So the Raspberry Pi was something that came out a couple years ago, just an itty-bitty little kind of a hobbyist device. The idea was that this company, and I can't remember who started it, wanted to make development environments for Linux and for hardware stuff as cheap as possible. These Raspberry Pi devices are a couple inches by 3 inches, super cheap, like $30, $35, something like that. But you can run Linux on them, and you can interact with different things. It's kind of like the Arduino stuff, but not quite as hardware heavy. But the idea was to make the barrier entry for people trying to develop pretty low. And as you can imagine, for something that's open like that and cheap like that and small like that, it set the world on fire. They're incredibly popular. People are doing crazy things with Raspberry Pi, controlling their Christmas lights with them, making, like, I saw one that had a kitty door with a camera where the Raspberry Pi would take a picture of the cat and open the kitty. I mean, just amazing stuff. I'm curious about that stuff, but I'm not smart enough to use it, nor do I have the spare time to try to figure out how to use it. I always told myself if I could think of something to do with a Raspberry Pi, I would buy one and do it. That's been like 2 or 3 years, and I haven't done it. But anyway, today I saw an article where they were announcing the Raspberry Pi 2, and there have been different versions of the Raspberry Pi, the A and the B and all that kind of stuff. Raspberry Pi 2 is going to be coming out, and normally that's not something that I would care about, but going to be the same thing, just a couple inches by 3 inches, $35. It's going to have a 900 megahertz ARM processor in it, which is 6 times better than the current one, the A6. I don't care about that. Support a gig of RAM, and it's got all the common ports that you're used to seeing. It's got HDMI, headphone, Ethernet, 4 USB ports. But here's the kicker. It will support Windows 10. And not only will it support Windows 10, Microsoft also published a thing today saying that Windows 10 will be free for Raspberry Pi 2 devices. So this is a crazy thing. Now, it's not full Windows 10. You're probably not going to be able to run the desktop and all that on it. But you'll be able to use the Windows environment to do like what's being called now the Internet of Things, but devices that are on the network and all that. But it will have a free Windows 10 will be available for that for $35. Now, I can't show it to you now because it's hooked up, but you guys know last week I told you my story about the little HDMI stick that I bought that was $100 that ran Windows, came with Windows 8, and all the fun ideas, behind your monitor and your TV and all that kind of stuff. Now we've got something that's even smaller, even cheaper, $35. They've not said in the article here whether the free license of Windows and the $35 comes with the viruses that my HDMI stick came with. I don't know. I'll talk to them about that. Talk to their marketing folks. They're probably in a press release they'll talk about whether the device comes with viruses or not. But if you're a hobbyist and you want to play with this kind of stuff, It's pretty cool, and for $35, man, you almost can't go wrong. So that's fun stuff. I love seeing the things that people are doing about that. So Jeff in the chat room, Jeff Jones, said he read an article about somebody who made a doorbell out of one, and it takes a photo when somebody hits the doorbell and emails it to you. That's great stuff. I mean, that's the whole thing, and it makes it easy for people who have these ideas but don't want to learn how to, build chips and solder and everything. It's great. And Lori in the chat room's talking about how having your kids do it. I absolutely know people who have kids 10 and under who've gotten these Raspberry Pi devices and built things with their kids with them. Like I think my Jeff Diverter at Rackspace, I think he got one for his son, and he built like an alarm for his bedroom so he could see when his older brother came in, but he built it with the Raspberry Pi, and it does something like, it emails him or something. So I mean, there's just all these great ideas, and $35. So that's just great stuff. I'm a big fan of that. And so Jack in the chat room, and I see some other names. Last week I talked about how I bought a little device. I guess I can unplug here because it's not currently on. At CES a couple of weeks ago, Intel announced that they were going to be making small stick devices that would run full Windows. I can't unplug this with one hand. Oh, there it goes. So this is the device. This is how big it is, and I don't have anything to hold up next to it well, here's a USB thumb drive. So here's what it is. It's got an HDMI male on it, so you can connect it directly to a monitor or a TV or whatever. It uses USB power, though it's the 2-amp power, so you got to have one of the, the good things, good USB things. It's got a full-size USB port on it, so I've been hooking a hub up to it. It's got a USB on the go port on it. It's got a micro SD slot on it, but it runs full Windows. So this is an Atom processor, a Z3735G processor. It's got 2 gig of RAM. It's got 32 gig of onboard storage. This one is not the Intel one that they talked about at CES. I bought it from another website. It was $109. $109 for this, runs full Windows. You get the Windows desktop, you hook a mouse keyboard up to it, all that kind of stuff. Insanely cool device. And honestly, so a buddy of mine, before I went online today, his dad has a computer, and it got infected with a virus. And it's, he was having a bunch of problems, but this thing was like 6 years old, and I told him, like, once your computer gets infected with a virus, as far as I'm concerned, there's one way to clean it: F-disk and format. I will never trust a machine that's been infected with a virus. And I said, how old's the machine? He said, oh, it's probably 6 years old. And I said, he might want to look at getting a new one. Things have gotten better in 6 years. But in all reality, for what his dad does, his dad cruises the web, looks at, pictures of the grandkids in email. Something like this would be enough for him. It's all he would need. It'll run Outlook. It'll run, Internet Explorer, all that. $109. So, and you're going to be seeing more of these things. But what's funny about this is last week in podcast 233, I talk about when I got this thing, I plugged it in and started playing with it, and it was acting kind of squirrely. Long story short, the thing came from the factory with a virus on it. It came with the Win32 Salady.au virus on it. So I was trying to use it, and like Task Manager wouldn't work, and I couldn't open up a registry editor, and Windows Update wouldn't update, and stuff like that. It was infected with a virus. So, but since then, I have put Windows 10 on this, and I've been using it since then. I put Windows 10 on it probably Tuesday of last week, and so I've been running Windows 10 on it, been working like a champ, been watching videos with it, and cruising the web and all that. So that's been pretty cool. So another thing that I wanted to talk about briefly tonight, if you have been playing with Windows 10 and have a device like this and want to put Windows 10 on it, I found a great article that shows you how to create USB install media from the Windows 10 ISO. There's a tool, I think the tool is called Rufus, which is just an awesome name, by the way. So you use this tool Rufus, you point it at your Windows 10 ISO. For this, I use the 32-bit version. Point it at the ISO, put in a USB drive, next, finish, and you got a little USB drive you can boot to and install Windows 10. So had really good luck with that. Played with that a bunch last week and installed Windows 10 on it. having a blast. So if you've got some kind of little device like this, or tablets or whatever, something that you can't mount the ISO or burn a CD for, it's super easy to make USB install media. Now, I did try that with my Toshiba. Oh, just a second. My Toshiba Encore Mini here. This guy was one of the first $99 tablets that I bought, and it's got it's the low end, so it's got 1 gig of RAM, it's got 16 gig of storage, and it's using a thing called Wim Boot, where it has the OS installation is compressed on the C drive. So one of the first things I wanted to do was try Windows 10 on this, and the current Windows 10 preview does not support upgrading devices on compressed drives. I hope that the RTM version will, but right now you cannot do that on these kind of devices. So my next bit was, all right, no problem. I've got this USB bootable device for Windows 10. I could not get this device to boot off a USB for me. So the same USB key that I used to install Windows 10 on this would not boot to. So this is still running Windows 8.1. The other thing is this has 32 gig of storage, so I was able to do a regular install of Windows 10 on it. This has 16 gig of storage. I probably need to do a Wim boot install, but that's a little trickier. And I think I know how to do it, but I need this thing to boot from it first, because you can't do a Wim boot install of Windows 10 on any device. It has to have a certain type of drive. It has to have a certain size of drive, all of which this has, obviously, because it's running Windows 8.1 with Wim boot, but I can't get the darn thing to boot to my drive. So I need to play with that a little bit more. But then I'll put it on this. But just lots of opportunities out there. In the chat room, they mentioned another tool that does this, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. And this is a tool from Microsoft that does it. So great times, lots of cool stuff. We got new versions of Office coming out, new versions of Windows coming out, all that. So just a great time to be a nerd. I had some other SharePoint stuff that I was going to talk about last week and didn't have time. Don't have time this week. I'll bump it up a little bit for next week. Next week, we'll be at SP TechCon, a week from right now. Oh my God. And we'll be doing the podcast live from SP TechCon. So those of you who are not going to SP TechCon, first, my condolences. You're missing out. It's a great time. But the good news is you don't have to worry about when and where the podcast will be at. It will be at the same time, 8:30 Central. It will be at the same location, youtube.com/ToddKlintNetcast or toddklint.com/netcast. So don't worry about that, and Shane will be there. And I got some new hardware, and this is kind of fun. I've not told anybody about this yet. It's the first time I've talked about it. But one of the things that Shane and I struggle with when we do this on the road is equipment, because we got this one mic, and you got to sit close to a mic if you want the sound to sound good. And Shane gets all close, and you know, I have minty fresh breath. I think Shane just can't control himself sometimes. He gets a little too close. His hand rests on my leg. I feel very uncomfortable. So I got something for next week. So this is a trick that I read about from some other podcasting blog or something. The PlayStation SingStar game is a karaoke game, has mics, and there are two mics, and it shows up as a regular USB device. You can plug this USB device and this and these into any machine like a Surface Pro 2, and you can both use them. So that's what Shane and I will be using. I've practiced with it once before. We're able to mix it together. It sounds good. And that way I can keep a safe distance from Shane without any, inappropriate touching. I won't be needing any dolls or anything to show people where Shane has been touching me. But that will be a little better audio. And there's going to be a bunch of people there. Lori from the chat room, she will be there. Laura Rogers, she's normally in the chat room. She will be there. A whole bunch of other people. Though I'm seeing some sad folks that won't be there. It's very sad. But we'll be doing the podcast from SP TechCon next week, so tune in for that. So speaking of, let's go on to the shameless self-promotion portion of the podcast. So again, next week, a week from today, oh my God, it sneaks up so fast, SP TechCon. You can go to sptechcon.com and find out all about that. Probably still some seats, can probably still sign up. Shane and I will be doing 4 sessions, count them 4. Administrator skills, which is kind of a high level. Here are things that you might not know about SharePoint 2013 that we're going to tell you about. Number 2 is troubleshooting techniques, and this is all the different ways that Shane and I have tried to ferret out problems in SharePoint over the years. So there's a lot of recommendations for tools, a lot of recommendations for tips, things like that. If you're the kind of person that has to fix broken SharePoint for a living, this is exactly the kind of session that you want to go to. And then sessions 3 and 4 will be upgrading. We'll be doing that. We'll be doing some demos, things like that. So that is next week, sptechcon.com. And Rackspace will have a booth. And as always, if you're at this conference or any other conference, come up and find me if I'm at the Rackspace booth or after a session or just walking around the hall, picking my nose or whatever. By all means, come up, introduce yourself, have me wipe my hands off first, I suppose. Shake my hand. I'm very friendly, very approachable. By all means, come up and say hey. Then it looks like I mostly get March off, and in April I get to speak. I have the distinct honor of speaking at the SharePoint Evolution Conference in London, England. Oh my goodness, I am just excited beyond excitement about that. That is April 20th through the 22nd in London, and you can sign up for that at SharePointEvolutionConference.com. Steve Smith at Combined Knowledge puts on a hell of a show every year. This is the first year that I've been able to get involved, and I am super duper excited for that, and I will be doing my 2 upgrade sessions there. So that'll be great. Not sure what's going to happen with the podcast. Shane is not going to that one, so we'll probably have him stay back and do it here because the time zone wise it gets kind of ugly over there in the UK. To do at 8:30 Central. So ran a little bit over tonight, not too bad. Did a good job. So Lori's got a good idea. We could do a UK friendly one. Have to investigate that. That's not a horrible idea. Maybe we'll do both. We'll do 2 podcasts that day. I'll do one early for the European office or European audience. Shane will do a much crappier one later on for the American audience. That's got potential. I like the way you think. So that's all coming up. So busy year already, and then Ignite. Hopefully I'll get to be involved with that somehow. Good stuff. So thanks to everybody. The chat room, stick around for a while. I'll be in the chat room for a while. As always, you can hit me up on Twitter at Todd Klindt. You can email me todd.klindt@rackspace.com. I got myself one of those YouTube channels at youtube.com/ToddKlindtNetcast, and you can always just go to my blog, toddklindt.com. And then the page for this is toddklindt.com/netcast. So thanks again. Again, chat room, stick around. I'll be around for a while. And I will see the rest of you guys next week when we come to you live from Austin, Texas at SP TechCon. Thanks. Have a good night.